I have been waiting for this day for 9.5 months. Today we're actually going to be harvesting the garlic that I planted with Meg back in October of last year. And obviously this is a much anticipated event. I'm very, very excited to harvest it. But people tend to have a lot of questions about the best way to harvest, when to harvest, curing the garlic and all of that. So I think we're gonna do kind of a deep dive today. Not on the planting the garlic, that won't be coming until next October if you guys want me to remake the video that I did with Meg last fall. But we can definitely get into some of the varieties, hard neck versus soft neck, and the curing process today. So we're gonna head down to the garlic patch in a minute and I'm gonna show you the actual plants and what I'm looking for to know that they're ready. I actually think that mine are a little bit overdone, but it's not the end of the world because all that means is that it won't last as long in storage. So, which I'm gonna use it all up anyway, so that's not a big deal. This is actually my first year growing soft neck garlic. I've only ever grown hard neck garlic before just because it tends to do a little bit better in a northern climate. And the hard neck variety that I choose to grow and have always grown is Music. I pick Music because it's exceptionally hardy. The bulbs themselves are really, really large and it has a pretty good storage life for hard neck garlic. That is the one downside of hard neck. It doesn't store quite as long or as well as soft neck does, but I've just found that in a colder climate it does a little bit better. But things are warming up, so I kind of decided to risk it with the soft neck this year and give that a try because I really want to be able to braid it. And with a hard neck, because the stalk is hard, it can be really hard to braid unless you actually like kind of gut it and remove the inner stem part, which is just way too much effort for me. But I'm excited because this year I'm doing, I think it's called Achilleum red garlic. I'm probably saying that wrong, and we'll be able to braid that. So those are kind of just like the main differences between hard neck and soft neck. It's going to come down to your climate and your goals in terms of storage. I can't really tell you too much about flavor wise. I think that soft neck is considered to be, one or the other of them is considered to be stronger in flavor, but I've never had any complaints about Music. The one thing that I will say is that if you're going to try, a lot of people try like hacking it by growing garlic from the grocery store, and I think if you're going to do that, I would recommend only using garlic that's from a farmer's market and is organic, because a lot of times they're spraying the stuff at the grocery store with anti-sprouting agents, which can make it really hard to sprout. And also it's not generally guaranteed to be disease-free, which is also true in a farmer's market situation. And that can just mean that you're introducing pathogens like garlic rust into the soil. So it's a risk, but it does save you some money if you want to try that way. Personally, I prefer to get my garlic from a company that is guaranteeing the cloves to be for seed garlic and disease-free. But this is the time of year where my DMs are full of people asking me, how do I know when it's time to pull the garlic? Here's what you need to know if you're going to be pulling your garlic soon, which you probably are. It's July 14th here in Massachusetts, and I probably should have pulled mine a little while ago. One of the main ways I can kind of mark when I need to start watching to see if the garlic is ready to be pulled is counting back from when I harvested my scapes. So usually within 3 to 4 weeks of harvesting your scapes, your garlic is going to be ready to harvest next. So it's actually been just a little bit over 3.5 weeks for me since I harvested my scapes, and I think my garlic is probably a little bit overdone. And the reason I think that is because most of the time we're looking for the lower like 2 to 3 leaves to be brown and those upper leaves to still be mostly green. And I was away on vacation, so I think I kind of missed the ideal window. And another thing that we're looking for is for the weather to be relatively dry, because we don't want to pull it when there's a lot of moisture, because that can just lead to mold issues in storage. So my leaves are a little bit more brown than I would like, and all this means is that each leaf connects down to that papery husk that protects the garlic plant when you dry it. And so when that husk is kind of degraded because it's been in the soil too long, you just don't have as much of a shell to actually have the plant like store really, really well. So it just means that your plant might not store as long. You definitely don't want to wait until all the plant is brown, because at that point the bulb could have already started rotting or sprouting in the soil. So now you know how to tell if your garlic is ready to harvest. So we're going to hop down to the garlic bed and I'm going to give you some tips on exactly how I harvest my garlic and what you need to look out for depending on the varieties that you might be growing. Before we talk about exactly how to harvest the garlic to avoid damaging the bulb, there's one more thing that I wanted to let you know. If you're still feeling like uncertain about harvesting your garlic and you're not sure if it's ready, and that's just to pull a test bulb. Like, you don't need to pull it all at once. If you're concerned that something's going on with your garlic or it might not be ready, you can just kind of pull up a single bulb and see if it looks like it's ready to go. So what we're looking for is for the shoulders of the garlic to be fully developed and rounded out and uniform, and about the size of the variety that you're planning to grow. And like I said, this is getting pretty darn crispy, and I probably could have pulled it a little bit sooner, but it's perfectly okay. This is the size that we're expecting for music garlic. I did have some rain in the forecast that was kind of unavoidable, and at this point it's like, well, I have to pull it. So there's still more mud on this than I would necessarily like, because if we're pulling this at the right time when it hasn't just rained in the last 5 to 7 days, and if you're watering your garlic, you should stop irrigating 5 to 7 days before you plan to harvest as well. You wouldn't have quite as much of this clumpy mud stuff drying on it. So all I'm gonna do is let this air dry before I start curing it for a little while, just so it's easy to brush off that excess mud. Now, you just saw me yank a garlic bulb out of the ground, and you're gonna see and hear a lot of people this time of year telling you to never ever do that. And there's a couple of reasons why it was okay in this specific situation. So this is music garlic, which generally has a much thicker, sturdier stalk than a lot of other varieties. You just wanna make sure that you're not pulling on a plant when the soil is really, really compacted. In this case, because it's been mulched particularly, and I've worked this soil for many, many seasons, I know that the soil is not compacted. I know that these plants can be pulled up easily. If I didn't think they could be pulled up easily, I would be telling you to use some kind of broad fork just at the base of the plant to loosen the soil before you pull on the bulb itself, so that you don't cause any bruising or damage. But overall, that decision is going to be totally based on the variety that you're growing. So I'm going to get all this harvested, and then I'll show you how I'm going to cure the garlic. There's a few different ways that you can do this too, and it's just kind of choose your own adventure, but I'm going to tell you what I do and why I do it. Okay, it is 6 o'clock and it's still 90 degrees out, so really, really, really humid today and not super comfy for doing a big harvest like this, but we got it all done. This is all the hard neck. The soft neck doesn't look so great. I feel like I should have probably picked it a little bit sooner. I think it started kind of decomposing in the ground. So I'm going to bring it up to the main garden area and we'll talk about curing this. Sage really wanted to be in this one. Can you find it? He's the real star of the show, we know it. Curing is just a really fancy term for removing moisture from something. We cure squash as well in the same way, but basically all we're doing is we're putting it in a more controlled environment before we store it long term to remove as much of that moisture as possible so that the plants don't develop mold. And the two main ways that this is done is either hanging it, which is great if you're short on space, or on racks, which is what I prefer to do because it's just a little bit less time intensive, and you know we like anything that's a little bit lazy because that saves our energy for other things. One method isn't necessarily better than the other, it's just whatever works best for you. No matter which method you decide to go with, there's a couple considerations that you need to look for the location of where you're going to be keeping these in terms of just like the humidity and the overall climate. So in a perfect world, the plants are kept out of direct sunlight because that UV can break down the garlic plants, out of temps above 90 degrees because it will literally cook the garlic, and out of humidity above 50%. Actually, 50% is the ideal. You can go as low as 45%. I know this is one of those kind of really highly technical things that can seem intimidating, but just grab like an $11 thermometer off of Amazon. I have one that I can link in my essentials down below for you, and keep it in whatever room you're considering using for the garlic. Most of the time, your house is fine. A basement or garage is ideal. So I actually keep mine in the basement down here, and I'll show you the racks that I use for that in a minute. The reason the humidity level is so important is because if we're looking at over 60% humidity, that can cause mold, and under 40% will actually dry the garlic out and almost dehydrate it. You can make garlic powder out of this, but that's not how I recommend doing it. And other than that, the two other things that you need to keep in mind are ventilation ventilation. So if it's an area where the air is really stagnant or maybe above the ideal humidity level especially, it's really important to just have a fan blowing on them and not crowd them all together too tightly so that they do have room to breathe. And most importantly is we do not want to trim off this stalk just yet. I know it's not very pretty, it's kind of messy, it makes it even more of a pain to store. Some people will do a method where they cut it right here, and if you are short on space, you can do that, but leaving as much of that stalk as possible is going to give your garlic the best chance of being able to store as long as possible too. So we do not trim this until after it is cured, and that can take anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks. Again, it just depends on your climate and the exact location that you're curing these, but you'll know it's done because all of these will have turned crispy brown. I'm going to show you where I'm putting these in because at this point, that's all we have left to do until it's time to trim these up, clean them up, which won't be for another couple of weeks, and I'll show you that when I do it. But for now, we're just gonna pop these in the basement and let them do their thing. There's that creaky door. You're coming with me. Welcome back to my creepy basement. If you missed it, we were starting our seeds on these racks back in January and February, which is kind of crazy to think. So I do still have my grow lights hanging up here. And don't mind the graffiti from the previous owners. They left us some beautiful artwork to enjoy. So these are just plain old baker racks, and over in this corner I do have a dehumidifier. Just most basements need them, and it's something that we already have around just to keep the basement at the correct humidity. So I'm trying to keep it around 45-50 down here right now, and that has already been this typical humidity levels that we get unless it rains. So all I'm going to do is fill up these racks and leave it. So I just wanted to show you really quick what I did here because it's nothing fancy. I didn't try to make them in perfectly even lines or worry too much about overcrowding them. You know, they do have some space between each of them, but there's also layers and there's plants on either end with the stems overlapping in the middle. And that is perfectly okay as long as you have ventilation and your humidity levels are under control. These should be just fine. I had one more kind of interesting thing I wanted to show you, at least I think it's kind of interesting. So I've talked about before that we removed the scapes from our hardneck garlic. That's the flower of the garlic. That's what makes it hardneck. We remove this about 3 or 4 weeks before we harvest the garlic plant so that the garlic can continue to grow to full size. Now this one was a little bit crowded because it was planted too close to another clove of garlic as well. So it's a little bit of an extreme example. However, this is what can happen when you leave the garlic scape on your garlic plant. Now this plant is growing for 9.5, 10 months sometimes, but most of the growth that it does on the bulb happens in those last 3 to 4 weeks after the garlic scape is taken off. If we don't take it off, it puts way more energy into reproducing than growing the bulb, and we get left with basically the same thing that we planted. It's the same size as the original clove that I put in the ground 9.5 months ago. So this is why we remove our garlic scapes. If you want to see me braid the garlic and what it looks like after everything's cured and I'm processing that, make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss that video. All right, my friends, that's all that I have for you on harvesting and curing the garlic for now, but let me know if you have any questions down in the comments below. Thank you so much for gardening with me, and happy growing.